Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Yuan.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. Welcome to the programme. Well, we're 9 days into what the Metropolitan Police have called the worst outbreak of rioting in over a decade. And the country is bracing for more anti-immigrant protests and riots tonight. Online groups are circulating calls for supporters to convene at 8 p.m. on at least 30 sites supposedly associated with assisting asylum seekers and other migrants.
But after almost a week and a half, the role of social media in all of this is still being uncovered and debated. We know that protesters have been using X and other online platforms to organise. That's no surprise. But Bloomberg has learned that authorities in the UK now suspect foreign state-backed actors are using bots and accounts with stolen British identities to amplify anti-immigration sentiments.
Well, we're going to discuss this and what's been happening in the UK. Bloomberg's EMEA equality editor Siraj Datu joins us now. Firstly, on this new discovery in Bloomberg reporting, can you tell us about the role of online platforms' potential misinformation in terms of orchestrating this unrest in all of these pockets across the UK?
I mean, it all started last Monday after the tragic attack that, we had an attacker who killed 3 children at a Taylor Swift themed dance class. There was silence. People wanted to know who the attacker was. And in that absence, in that silence, groups online, individuals, far-right agitators started to falsely share the idea that it was a Muslim who had stabbed these children, and also that it was an asylum seeker or an illegal immigrant of some kind. Of course, what very quickly happened then is that the police had to share the details that this was a 17-year-old. He was actually from Cardiff. His parents are from Rwanda, but he was British. But that first fake name went very viral very, very quickly. People started saying, look what Muslims are doing. And it led into this anti-immigration sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment. And very, very quickly, things online turned quite violent. And so you had that misinformation right from the start. That largely at the beginning happened on X. And then you started having groups organizing on different platforms, places like Telegram, places like Discord, where they're not necessarily available to the public. You really had a very quick virality of this misinformation. The key thing that happened in this time was that it played on the fears that people have. And very quickly, that escalated into violence.
Yeah, the speed of information and disinformation spreading has really been quite something, hasn't it? I think back to the riots in 2011, and of course social media did exist back then, but it wasn't kind of all pervasive in the way that it is now. How much do you think that foreign states have, and obviously we're only just starting to uncover this, but how much do you think that foreign states have been interfering in this business?
This is a really tricky one. Obviously we do have reporting out today that shows the government is very much looking into the idea of foreign interference and foreign involvement. And this is not necessarily new. We know that hostile states have been involved in spreading, sharing misinformation for some time. But what I will say is I spoke to a group called Logically, a group that counters disinformation. And they spoke to me about a group called Channel 3 Now, which is a fake news channel. And they were one of the first accounts on X to share this fake name. And it started out as a YouTube channel that was sharing Russian home videos. It then made the shift to Pakistani content. It went through a cycle of different branding, different fake news organization names. And then now it's registered in Lithuania. And what they said to me is it mirrors the tactics of a Russian disinformation campaign, but then cautioned and added, but the problem is that real people, especially in their words, people who are extremely online people, tend to post online in a way that mirrors bots. That's why it's so hard to really tell who's behind some of this.
Yeah, okay. Also, when it comes to that's interesting in terms of sort of foreign states and the influences that may be behind this. What about Elon Musk and his role? You mentioned X. He has fanned the flames, one can argue, of extremism in the UK with little consequence. He's been highly critical also of Keir Starmer. What's his involvement here?
And this is a really interesting one. So obviously, Elon Musk, the owner of X, he's made really provocative posts on his own platform saying that civil war is inevitable. Um, Henry Parker from Logically told me that actually he's really going against the terms and conditions of his own platform. This isn't really, this sort of language isn't acceptable. But of course, he is the owner, so I don't think they're going to delete his account. But what we have seen recently, people like Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who's been inspiring a lot of the protests in person, but while he's been abroad, reportedly in Cyprus on holiday, um, he wasn't allowed on Twitter just a few years ago. He was banned, and he's been allowed back on X. So I think Musk's role has been twofold. It's not just potentially, getting into clashes with the prime minister, but also the way that he has led his company.
Something that Elon Musk posted about, in fact, just in the last 24 hours, people being arrested for social media posts, people being arrested under the Communications Act for posting on social media. But this is a controversial area, isn't it? Can the UK really police the internet in this way?
So yeah, again, this is of course, it's going to be controversial. I guess it comes down to the idea that should incitement of hatred only apply in person, or should you be charged for incitement of hatred wherever it happens? And obviously, the Communications Act means that and the government decided that it should be. So that it's not really new. It's something that's been happening for quite a while, but obviously in situations like this where there are inflamed tensions, where we do have violence, perhaps we're hearing about these charges being made more, whereas in normal circumstances it just happens behind the scenes. I should clarify, that the people who have been charged on this, who have been saying things like go and burn hotels that have asylum seekers in them, it's not language that is it's not tempered language. Obviously, that it is quite violent language.
Mm. A YouGov poll shows 47% of Britons now see right-wing extremists as a major threat, which is actually up 15 points since February. So there is also the fact that this is filtering through to the public consciousness, obviously in a big way. There is now an expectation, I'm not sure how to describe it. Is it an expectation or now a warning of more violence expected tonight? All the main media outlets in the UK talking about the number of police that are being prepared. How do we think about that this evening? Does that play into the sort of far right narrative? Is it also, one could argue that it's trying to squash what is happening in the UK by kind of forewarning a lot more people about it?
Yeah, and to be fair, this is this tactic that the far right has of announcing places that they are going to target isn't really new. We saw it a few nights ago. So obviously, in this instance, these are around at least 30 sites linked to immigration and asylum locations all around the country, from quite multicultural parts like Harrow to all around. So there are two different areas here. It's we've seen in the past the far right have telegraphed the idea they're going to go to specific areas, and they haven't showed up. And what you've had instead, and you had this in Birmingham a few nights ago, is that you had men come and try and protect their community, and in the tense atmosphere, it then also descended into a little bit of violence, and they attacked a man outside a pub. And so, on the one hand, you have this instance where the far right is drawing attention to specific areas, hoping that counter-protesters may appear and get violent themselves, which gives its own image out to the media. And on the other hand, actually trying to get people outside to protest immigration. Police have been outside in all communities, really speaking to groups. Community groups, asylum groups have been speaking to people, urging them not to show up, don't come and defend. Police are there. They really do have the numbers out. They've been really spreading the message that they will have a presence outside these locations and will be able to call on more groups at the same time. And of course, the government has also made available more prison cells, jail cells for custodial sentences.
And how are campaign groups that represent asylum seekers and ethnic and minority communities dealing with this? How are they responding?
So yeah, like I said, they've really been sending out the message to people in the local communities. That obviously, at the beginning, they spoke to the local councillors, spoke to the MPs, and spoke to the police. And the message they really are sending is just one of caution. They've been really working with the police to try and make sure that their spaces, their places are as safe as possible. People they protect just are safe. Solicitors, as much as possible. These agencies, immigration facilities, have been asking people to work from home as much as possible. And then when it comes to tonight, really telling people, don't come and defend us. The police will be there to defend us.
I suppose as we think about this now, how much, as you say, we're just at the beginning of trying to understand and pick apart the real world violence, the online inflammatory language, the seeds perhaps, on media platforms and the outcome in the real world. How much, in your view, has this been bubbling under the surface? How isolated or widespread is this? I think that's also something that's very important for the UK in terms of understanding the political and social action now in the UK, and also what that means for people outside of the UK looking in at the country and at what is happening here.
Yeah, so in the last few days, you've seen this instance where foreign states have been sending out messages to their citizens, places like Malaysia and UAE, telling people not to go near the riots. So, is it going to become an issue for tourism? It's too early to tell at the moment, but people are definitely concerned. Again, having spoken to groups that tackle disinformation, they say what has happened in this instance is not necessarily surprising. And it has been bubbling up. So we had during COVID anti-lockdown protests that organized online. That then moved on to anti-vaccine conspiracy groups and protests, and then that merged into different campaigns against 15-minute cities and the ultra-low emission zone ULEZ, which often turned into an anti-Muslim campaign against London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. So what campaigners told me is that far-right groups have somehow found a way to marry the language of conspiracy with the language of anti-immigration. And so they've also managed to change, they've managed to shift their focus very quickly and also take advantage of existing platforms and channels they already had to organize so fast in this instance. So it's right to say that's been bubbling over. And while we haven't seen protests be so violent in the recent past, as much as we have obviously in the last week or so, the fact that they've managed to organise so quickly shouldn't necessarily be a surprise.
Siraj, great to get your take on all of this. Siraj Datu, that's Bloomberg's EMEA Equality Editor.
Well, we will be following, of course, what flows from this story and indeed what actually happens tonight. We don't know. A lot of warnings out there and a lot of unrest and violence in, as I say, isolated pockets across the UK, but we will no doubt be reporting on this. The first major domestic test, I think, for this now 1-month-old government. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.